Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon Edit 2022. Welcome to the track Open Source or Open Core in your data layer. What needs to be evaluated before diving in? My name is Asmita, your host, and our co-host today is Shanna. Please be mindful of our COVID regulations and keep a mask on if you want to. This session is currently streaming via Zoom and will be recorded. It will be available online in a few weeks. Today we have our guest, Anil Inamdar, and he would be speaking about the same track. Anil is the VP and Head of Data Solutions at Instaclustr by NetApp, which provides a managed platform for open source data layer and developer workflow technologies. Anil has 20 plus years of experience in data and analytics roles. Prior to Instaclustr, he held data and analytics leadership roles at Dell EMC, Accenture, and Visa, among others. Anil lives and works in the Bay Area. So thank you, Anil, to join us today. I'll hand over the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Asmita. Welcome, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the conference so far. It's hot, and this is my first time in USC. It's a great campus. So I'm going to talk about open source, and there's a term open core, and those who are new to open source, sometimes they get confused. So I'm going to kind of drill into what is open source, what is open core, what are some of the considerations if you start using open source technologies. And there are many open source technologies. We specialize in database open source technologies. Okay. Yes. So a brief history. Okay, I think I won't take too much time. So the open source revolution, what started, everything okay?
Yeah, I am not sharing the video, so I can start the video.
Okay, that's okay, that's fine. All right, I'm gonna move it here. All right. So this open source all revolution was started by Richard Stallman in like 1984. He formed this FSF, Free Software Foundation. It was mostly a revolution against the proprietary software. Okay, they were sick of paying money for software. They said, okay, why can't we write free software? And 1985, the GNU first public license was announced. 1994, Linux 1.0 was released, and then in 1998, Netscape released its first free software. And the open source term was used for the first time. 2003, Linux, OS, Apache, they became mainstream, and the progress is continuing from then on. So open source is not as new as we think of, but it has gained a lot of popularity in recent years. This is kind of my progression, and this beginning, expansion, maturity. I think there are no hard rules there. I came up with this just to understand. Okay, so as I said, it began mid 80s, late 80s, and through early 90s. It was the purpose of this was like a revolution against the closed source. Okay? The way people used to work on these projects was asynchronous collaboration. The market was early adapters, startup. The licensing was free. Obviously, that was the whole reason why they started this revolution. Some of the examples are Linux and MySQL. Then we go to the expansion phase, like early 2000, I would say. So this software was built with commercial customers in mind. It typically started in a commercial company, and then was kind of later on moved to a foundation that was open source and free. For example, like Hadoop was developed in Yahoo, and then Kafka was developed in LinkedIn. Cassandra was developed in Facebook, and then they open sourced it later on. Again, the licensing was free. I will talk about licensing, but you could charge for enhancements. Okay, and I'll talk about that. Then now we are in the kind of maturity phase, as I call it. This is kind of built for enterprise customers. Cloud plays a big role here. It is primarily developed by commercial businesses. Okay, initially it started with like these kids wanting to kind of revolt against closed source software, and now it is mostly written by commercial business. The market is enterprise customers. and it was partly free. Again, same licensing as before. Some of the examples are Confluent, Mongo, Elastic.co. So open source popularity, I think, as you have seen, as you're seeing in the graph, um, uh, the closed source popularity, the commercial software popularity is decreasing. Okay, while the open source popularity is increasing. There are many great products that are in the market, and people are really interested in it. So why open source? Okay, I think the obvious answer, the way it began is, hey, I don't want to pay money for my software. But there are many other reasons why you would like to use, or why enterprises use open source. So the economies of scale, okay, which is kind of the most obvious reason, most cited reason, no licensing cost, faster time to market, no vendor lock-in, no technology lock-in. These are the standard things that people will tell you. But security is, again, people use is for security reasons. Okay, the 15, 20 years ago, if we had used open source, there were a lot of holes, a lot of challenges with security. People did not trust it, but now the software is very secure. Many people are using it, so the loopholes are found, and so the more people use it, the more loopholes are found, and it's very secure nowadays. Intellectual property, okay, these open source foundations like Apache, they provide flexible licensing, scalability and reliability. The software is peer reviewed, okay, and so it becomes very reliable. And a lot of large enterprises like Apple and Netflix and Amazon, they are committers. They are using this software, so it becomes very scalable because these are large enterprises. Supportive community. I mean, this is kind of the heart and soul of open source. Okay, many of these software is there are thriving, vibrant communities behind the software, and they work with this on this with passion. Apache Software Foundation has around 8,000 committers. And last but not the least, okay, is innovation. And I would probably start that. I would probably say that innovation is the most critical advantage with open source software. If you are a company like Apple or Netflix or DoorDash, okay, and I think, or Uber, managing large enterprises, and you want a feature for a particular database, and you go to Oracle and say, hey, I need this feature, okay, it's not going to adhere to your timeline. Okay, they will say, okay, you will come after 6 months, come after 1 year, 2 years, whatever. Okay, they are not going to adhere to your timeline. But with open source software, if I'm using Cassandra and if I need a feature, I can start working on that feature directly. Okay, I can put my committers there, and I can create that excitement in the market, and other committers will join. So there's a great way, okay, to innovate. Okay, I don't have to plan my features based on somebody else's timeline. Okay, I can do it on my own. So what is open core? So far we were talking about open source. So what is open core? You might have heard this term. So open core is a business model for monetizing free open source software. Now, if the open source software is free, a lot of people are thinking, hey, how can I make money? These are popular software. How can I make money out of this? And so a lot of vendors, what they did was they took the core open source software. They, like for Cassandra, they took the core Cassandra distribution and added some features. So a software always lacks some features. Many of the open source software, not now, but in the beginning, lacked monitoring or backup, all those features. And these companies, they started adding these features and charging licensing for that. So the core is open, but on top of that, they have features for which they charge licensing, and that become open core. So the core is open, but everything else is not open. So the open source is always a project. Open core is a product. So the open core vendors, they exploited some of the challenges like support. Okay, like if there's a problem with Oracle or Microsoft, we can pick a phone and call them. When the software is owned by community, who do you call? Okay, so so they solved that problem, these vendors, and they added features like monitoring and auto provisioning and things like that. So there are vendors like Cloudera and DataStax and Confluent, okay, who have exploited this space. Okay, so Cloudera is a very popular Hadoop vendor, DataStack's a popular Cassandra vendor, and Confluent is a popular Kafka vendor. But that's not the whole story. I think you need to be very careful. Yes, they're adding some value, definitely, but you need to be careful how to use them and when to use them. So I would say, and this is our research, and I'm a little bit biased because I work for a 100% open source technology company. The open core vendors are always marching towards proprietary solution. Okay, they start with open core, but they always march. And what happens? They start with open source, and there's a support gap. We already know that. They exploit that gap, which is fine. Then there's a feature gap, so they add features, which is also fine. And then they change their delivery model. Okay, say maybe go serverless or go you start using cloud, which is also fine. But by the time, okay, you are into a proprietary software mode. But remember that the community is not keeping quiet. The community is also working. So all the feature gaps, okay, they ultimately end up in the open source. So if you wait for a while or or excite the community, those features gaps will be filled. And same thing is true with the delivery model. Okay, so open core vendors do have some advantages, but those advantages will fade once the open source catches up with it. And some of the very popular software, the community is very strong, and they can add those features very easily or very quickly, for that matter. So you should keep this in mind when choosing open source vendors. And some of the open core may excite you with their features. Okay, but remember, there might be an open source solution available. And when I talk about open source ecosystem further in the talk, I will talk about that. Hey, there might be an open source project, and there might have a couple of features missing, but there's another open source product that's available that you can use in tandem with this, and that will solve your problem. And again, that's what our expertise is. So when you're deciding what to use, be careful about open core vendors. So open source versus open core, there are 5 considerations. Okay, I think. So how to choose this vendor? There are 5 considerations, and these are licensing, like how the licensing works, governance, brand, business model, and ecosystem. Licensing. Now, even though these software are open source, okay, somebody owns the license. Okay, either it's Apache Foundation or some commercial company. Somebody owns the license, and the one who owns the license, okay, has the right to make whatever changes. It could be in most cases it is a foundation like Apache Foundation. So the open source licenses are generally perpetual, but there are various various nuances. Okay, and so this slide I took from Wikipedia, okay, which discusses open source licensing, which is a very complex. I mean, it's fairly complex. So the idea for this presentation is not for you to kind of understand this license. It's very complex. I'm going to simplify it, but the point I'm making is it's a complex world, and so I'm going to simplify it for you. So you can focus only on 3 types of licenses. Okay, first is this permissive license. It allows broad free use of free use and modification with minimum obligation. You can make changes the way you want it. Okay, but the caveat is that I can take a particular distribution of open source and start adding and create a fork and start adding my own features. And now there are 2 versions available. One is true open source, and one is this open source with this fork with this proprietary features. So you should be careful about that. But most of the popular software has permissive licenses, and it's a good license. Apache 2.0 MIT license, it's a permissive license. Then the other is a copyleft license. So you might have seen copyright, and this is copyleft. Okay, again, this also allows broad free use of use and modification. However, anything that you do, the owner of that license owns that. Okay, like in the permissive license, I can create a fork. Here, you cannot create a fork. Then the third is custom license. Now here, you can do whatever you want. Okay, if I tomorrow I open a company, it's a profit-making company, and I use Apache license, which is an open source license, but I can if I'm the owner of that license and I'm owner of that product, I can encourage community people to work on it, but I'm a commercial company and I can still make money out of it. So the custom licenses are very tricky because it depends on who owns it. And many times these open core companies, they want to protect themselves. So what happens? I create a great software. Okay, like I have a great software, and AWS takes that software, hosts it, and they say, hey, you can start using it for free. Again, so the vendor does not like it, okay, because they have worked on it, and they would like to make money out of it. But AWS just comes in and hosts it, and then they cannot make any money. I will talk about this. So license is fairly complex, but permissive license and copyleft license are the ones that you should focus on. Custom licenses, I will talk about that as well as with an example that will clarify things. Next is governance. The governance is like whoever owns the license kind of governs, has the governance. So the license could be owned by a foundation like Apache 2.0, or it could be owned by a corporation. If it's owned by a corporation, then the corporation has a right to, if it's a profit-making corporation, it has a right to do whatever it wants. Okay, the license could be open, okay, but the governance is not open. So in case of foundation like Apache Foundation, both the governance is open and the license is also open. In corporations, if the corporation owns it, I can start with an open source license, like Elastic.co was an open source license, and you could use that software for free, but they will charge money for some extra features, or they will host it for you. Now, what happened was recently, and this happened recently. So Elastic.co had a really good product, Elasticsearch, okay, a really good product, very popular product. It's an open source product. So the core was open and anybody could use it, but they had added some features, and for which we need to pay licenses, and also they were hosting it for you, okay, and charging money for it. So AWS came, it took the open source copy, it hosted on its platform, and said, hey, I'm AWS, I'm reliable, I'm secure, I am scalable, and you have the software for free. Okay, obviously undercutting Elastic.co, so they changed their licensing. Yes, and I'll talk about it. So you have to be careful who owns the license and who owns the governance. Next is brand. Okay, so brand is the kind of the logo that goes along with it. It's not very critical in making a decision, but it confuses. So I just wanted to mention that. It usually goes hand in hand with the governance. So the first three logos that you see, Cassandra, Kafka, and Spark, they're Apache Foundation and they're free. Okay? While the MongoDB and ScyllaDB are owned by a commercial company. So they are open source, but they're owned by a commercial company. So they make money out of it. Then the last one, Drupal, is owned by an individual. One person owns the license. Okay, it's free, but so there are different ways you can brand it, and you should remember who does what, who owns what. Next is business model. Okay. So there are a few business models I want to discuss. One is like pure open source, which technically is not a business model because I'm not making any money out of it. Okay, like Apache Cassandra and Apache Kafka, they are true open source software owned by community. There are a lot of key corporations that are committing to it. And then second is open core. That's again a business model. So open source, I cannot make money. How do I make money? I add features. That's open core. So Apache Cassandra was very popular. So DataStax took the open core, open source version and added features to it and called it DataStax. Okay, Confluent, they took the open source Kafka version and they added features to it, called it Confluent. Okay, so again, that's open core. Then the third is open source IP, or nowadays we call it open code. Okay, so companies like Elastic.co or Scylla are kind of open code customers. So the license is open source. You can go to the website and download the open source software, but you have to pay for it. So it is open source for name only. Okay? The software is open source, but if you want to use it, you have to pay for it. So you have to be very careful. They call these open source, but they are not really open source. Only the first item in the list is pure open source. Okay, then open core, you have to pay licensing. Open open source IP or open code, as we call it, again, you have to pay licensing. And the last are the cloud providers. Now, the cloud providers, they are everybody likes cloud. Okay, I mean, I love cloud. So they are stable, they are cost efficient, they are very reliable. But what they have done, because they have penetrated a big market, they have lots of customers using cloud for whatever reason. They take these free software, okay, and host it and start charging operational money for that. And many of the software people don't like that. Okay, so I'm going to take an example of Elastic.co. But these are some of the business models you should be careful about. So the white papers, I don't know if this document is shared with the audience, but if you do have it, okay, there are several other white papers that we have written. Will give you additional information on open source software. Okay, then the ecosystem. Now, ecosystem is how reliable an open source software is. Okay? The reliability can be measured in 2 or 3 areas. Number one, who backs up that software? Who is using that? Like if you look at Apache Cassandra, the market share of Apache Cassandra might not be that high, but in terms of RDBMS, in terms of database, it's not an RDBMS. In terms of database, it might be low. But Apple and Netflix are backing it up. Okay, and there are lots of commuters. Almost 60% of the commuters, okay, are from these 2 companies. Okay, so it is not going anywhere. It's a fairly stable. It's going to be there for a long time. And why do Apple and Netflix use it heavily? Because they are using it for their own systems. Okay. If they need a feature, they will collaborate and add that feature. They will excite the community. So it's a very stable company and a stable product. So from an ecosystem perspective, okay, I will bet on Cassandra because it is backed up by these large corporations. So similarly, there are other software. You can see who are the committers, who are the backers. So if it is very popular in the business, if it is backed up by this large corporation, there are lots of committers, then you go with it. Second is how many people, like finding good open source resource is also a challenge. So if you have lots of consultants available who can help you, then yes, you should go with that software. And many times you have a great software, but it has few features missing. Okay, now are there any other open source projects that kind of fill that gap? Okay, so again, that also becomes a part of your ecosystem. And I'm going to give you an example. So Confluent Kafka is an open core product. So the Kafka, they started with an open source product, they added their features and they charge licensing for it. But we are because we are in the 100% open source business, we found alternatives for all the features that they have added. Okay, so there's a core software and there are lots of other small projects, open source projects. So if you combine all that, okay, you won't need that licensed software. So for query, Confluent has KSQL. There's an Apache CalSite project you can use. For monitoring, Confluent has Control Center. We can use Prometheus. Alerting, Prometheus, again, alert manager. For replication, they have again Control Center. There's a Mirror Maker too. So all these projects can be used in tandem with the open source software, and they can eliminate the need for paying licenses. Same thing with backup and restore connectors. There are alternatives available all the time. As I said, that Elasticsearch saga. So basically, I'm going to take you through an example of this, what this complexity of this licensing is, and how the market influenced some changes. So Elasticsearch began using this Apache 2.0 license. It's a commercial company. Okay, it is using an open source license, which is fine. It experimented with some free licensing with XPack. I think that's confusing. Let's not. You don't worry about that. It's a little bit nuanced. Then the governance and decisions were made by Elastic.co, so a commercial company. So it's an open source software, but owned by a commercial company. So they're going to charge money for it. So Elastic.co made money by providing hosting services plus some proprietary add-ons. That is how they made money. Okay. The core software is free. They have some features for which they charge money. and they also host and they charge money. What's the time? Okay, yes. Now, so AWS, it took that Elasticsearch free product, open source product, and they started hosting it, okay, undercutting Elastic.go, which they didn't like. So recently, I think a year ago, Elastic.go changed their licensing model from Apache.2.2 to SSPL, server-side public licensing. Basically, AWS cannot host that for free. AWS will have to pay because they changed the licensing. Now, once that happened, AWS said, okay, it's a free software, I can fork it. So they forked it, and they, along with Netflix, they created a new distribution called OpenSearch. So now, if you want to use Elasticsearch, so there is an Elasticsearch by Elastic.go, which is a kind of a proprietary software. And then there's a true open source software called OpenSearch, which is backed up by AWS and Netflix, which is a fork that they created. So there are lots of interesting things going on in this world. So some of the popular OSS software and their licensing, like Cassandra, okay, it is by Apache 2.0. The governance is, again, it's a nonprofit foundation. DataStax Cassandra, on the other hand, okay, the core is Apache 2.0, which is free, but they added some proprietary features, and it's a commercial company. Kafka, same, Apache 2.0, a nonprofit. Confluent Kafka, again, same thing, Apache 2.0 core plus proprietary software, commercial company. MariaDB, it's a commercial company. Even though it's an open source license, it's a commercial company. So it's open source only in the name. Skilla, same thing. Open source software, you can download the software, but you have to pay if you want to use it. Commercial. Drupal, again, is individual license. Now, a couple of, I'm going to skip this slide. Now, just a couple of slides, maybe one slide about my company. So, so we are, or we were, a 10-year-old startup, okay? And we focused primarily on, not primarily, exclusively on 100% open source software. So at the bottom of the screen, Cassandra, Kafka, OpenSearch, Redis, Spark, Postgres, we have added a few things. That is what we support. And we provide 3 services: managed platform, support, and consulting. So if you're a financial company and you're using Cassandra and you're not interested in operating Cassandra, we can help you. We can operate that Cassandra cluster for you in any of the cloud of your choice. So that's one service. Other is support. As I said earlier, these software, because they are community software, they don't have their phone number to call for support. Okay, so we can provide the support 24/7. That's second service we provide. Third is consulting, which I lead. And with consulting, we can provide the kind of a full life cycle, all the way from strategy to architecture, development, implementation, training, support, and managed platform. So that's what we do. And this is an example where we have helped few clients. And here on the left-hand side, you see a client or a company using closed source or open core software, like Cassandra from DataStax, MongoDB, Kafka from Confluent, Redis from Redis Labs, Elasticsearch from Elastic.go. So they'll have to pay licensing. They are locked in, and it's a proprietary software mostly. But if you use all open source and use Instaclustr for support or managed platform, okay, there is no licensing fee, there is no vendor lock or no technology lock, and you're using 100% open source software. I'm going to skip this. So we were recently, so I said we were 10-year-old in a startup company. We were recently acquired by a company called NetApp. So we are part of this $6.5 billion company. So it's a big transition for us. We were 250 people, small company. Now we're part of a very large organization. It happened only a couple of months ago, 3 months ago. So integration is still going on, and we'll see what happens. So in conclusion, so if you want to use 100% open source technology, okay, if you want to use 100%, so use open source if you want to use 100% open source technology. Okay. If you don't want to pay software licensing cost, if you want to avoid vendor locking, technology locking, if you want to be part of the open source community, and if you want to continue to innovate your solution, you don't have to depend on a third party's timeline. Okay, then you use open source. And last slide. So for this conference, there's a special promotion of 2-hour open source consulting advice and a 1-week free access to Instaclustr platform. You can log into our platform in 2 or 3 minutes. You can spin up any clusters, 3-node clusters for Cassandra, Kafka, Elasticsearch, Redis, and use it. Just mention DataCon LA August 2022. And I think that's it. So thank you so much. I don't know if you have any time for questions, but we will take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil, for coming out.
All right.
It was a great presentation.
Thank you.